The following is brought to you by the Starfleet Podcast Network, SPN, The Spin. It's amazing how that warp scale gets exponential like that.
Do we have anybody still with us? Is anybody still awake?
The deep dive, old school trekkers are eating this up, and everyone else is just like, you guys lost me. This is too much.
Red alert.
I'm here with Larry Nemecek, who is a writer and author and also speaker, host, interviewer, producer. You've got a lot here. I'm kind of cheating a little bit.
This is why Dr. Trek is cheesy, but it came in handy. Yeah.
I'm cheating just a little bit reading off of Wikipedia, but it's there. Why reinvent the wheel?
That's what it's for, right?
So I'm going to read off a little bit here just to kind of start and then have you take over from there. So Larry Nemecek, first known widely for the official licensed bestseller Star Trek: The Next Generation Companion, from Pocket Books through 3 editions beginning 1992. Nemecek later wrote the Star Trek Stellar Cartography Map, I think I do have that, and book, set now used by franchise producers. He served as managing editor of Licensed Communicator magazine from 1998 to 2005. Do you have that book? Do you have the Stellar Cartography? Is
yeah, that's the 2018 one. Yeah.
Okay. That is awesome.
Book in the maps. Yeah.
I like those things. I like to see where things are. It helps to get that view of this is where the Federation is. This is the Klingon, Romulan.
Yeah. Here
are the planets, because as they're doing their thing, going around everywhere, you kind of feel like it's just the sense of where are you going, and
it's grounded.
Yes, and that's why
space. It's not ground, but you're grounded.
You're grounded. You're right. You're grounded in knowing where things are. That's why I had a very, very hard time with Lord of the Rings. Because as you've got Frodo and Samwise going from a point A to point Z, and there are all these stops in between. And for me, I'm the kind of guy that likes to know, all right, are they walking the whole way? Well, obviously they're walking the whole way. What's the route they're taking? How long is this taking? And I saw this thing. They took a map of their travel and overlaid it over the US. And it's like, holy shit, really? And apparently it took several years. I don't know if you're a Tolkien fan from the books or the movies or anything, but apparently.
I've been around people that were huge Tolkien fans, but I thought there were maps. There's maps of Middle Earth that Tolkien did himself. Right?
Yep. Well,
but you're talking about the scale, like overlaying it and all
that's
that.
What it is. It's the scale. Yes. It's the scale of seeing. Yeah, I'm a left brain kind of guy.
From Miami to Seattle? What?
It was right. From Montana to West Virginia. What the hell? Who would do that? And it's not in a straight line. Of course, there's all the curves and turns and avoiding trouble. So seeing your maps, it really helps put in a visual of where they're going and how they're doing that. Because of course, they get to every destination every week. It's really quick, like boom. Like that. We don't see the days or weeks in between. So that's the first question I have for you is the maps. Let's talk about the stellar cartography. That had to be tough. I can't imagine map making.
Well, so on one hand, when I was a kid and it was like the first, initial oomph, like the blueprints and the tech manual and the first BJ's first concordance and encyclopedia. When all that was like brand new and there was nothing, and there sure wasn't an internet or memory alpha, much less, Mike's later encyclopedia. But that was one of the things that attracted me. It was like I got her concordance. Because there's a lot of real science they had the science consultants, but part of that was they would use real star names to make it sound familiar. It wasn't always, like Zaphaphom or something. It was all, they would say Alpha Centauri. They would say Rigel and Altair and Canopus and Capella.
Right.
And then and if you got into reading the science notes, they would say, let's not use Deneb. Deneb's kind of far. Let's use, like either make up a star name or let's use something within the realm, or this star's too hot. It wouldn't have class M planets. And that was in the 60s, and we're so much so there was a little, and sometimes it was like, if it was just a matter of a name, it was okay, fine. But the whole idea, when they didn't exactly know what warp drive was, and they kind of had a vague, notion, but then still what they were putting in the stories was too much for what the classic formula. So there's a lot of things going. They always tried, and over the years, different generations of Star Trek did better at using real science. And of course, that was one of the big inspirations for scientists, aside from, sociologists and school teachers and all other kind of fields, ambassadors, politicians, but especially scientists and engineers and doctors. And one of the things was how Spock was logical and rational, but also just how Star Trek tried to be grounded even when they were projecting goofy future science. They, one of Gene's and Dorothy and whoever. And there's been a science consultant on just about every iteration and even movies. And sometimes they lost the battle to the writers, and something was, sometimes they had to climb uphill to make something, even with invented technobabble science. But one of the things that got me right off the bat, paging through, is I was always enjoyed star watching, like just backyard constellations and star watching. And what got me was realizing when BigJ put her concordance together, how many stars and planets there were, period. And then not just where they went, but like throwaway mentions, but also how many real stars there were. And I'm like, oh. And then to see Franz Joseph come out with his tech manual and try to organize that. And I'm like, wow, there's tons of stars here that are real, like Capella, like Rigel, like, Altair. So it was like, how would this look? So I saw what he had started to do was locate some real stars. And that became one of my first passion bits when I was like, in high school, was to try to chart the stars for real and then fit all the fictional stars around it so that the timeline of the episodes made sense. And then also to see what we knew about, like, that was a made up star. Oh, no, wait, that's an old Arab medieval name for a real star. That really was a real star, Oh, okay. And it wasn't all just Sigrid Draconis and all that. So
right.
That was one of the first passion things that I did to dive into. Now, that went away. I worked on this thing. That was one of my first, and my first disappointment was realizing that the thing we were going to publish with the great Jeff Mandel, who was then a fanboy in New York, part of Doug Drexler's circle in New York, working on the giant poster, but find out that something had happened and another project had been professionally sold and was going to be done instead. And everything I'd worked on was out the window, and I was like bummed. And then later on got to do it. But just to say that that's one little snippet. The whole thing with star charting from Star Trek was a thing that other people were interested in and worked on, and actually had Franz Joseph gave it a go, but then that was usurped. And then that had its problems too. The one that came out right about the time of the first movie. And then it wasn't until Mike Okuda was working on Next Generation and was trying to give some credence to that same feeling. And they came up with the price. They were bidding for the Barzan wormhole third season. And they had to give across the idea that remember the Ferengis are going to go scout the other end of this wormhole.
Exactly.
And Geordi and David jump. Well, they had to convey very quickly the idea that they went through a wormhole that covered a ton of distance without just saying, it's 32,000 light years. Well, that's another, flaky number. They wanted to really have something that was shorthand to get the idea across. And that's when Mike came up with the idea. That's when he invented the quadrant system, which we kind of had that now. So Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta was something invented for the price. And then very quickly they realized how useful that was. Within a couple of years, they're going to do DS9. A year later, they're going to do Voyager. And suddenly the whole idea of being cut off or being way off, or the wormhole to the Dominion, that's shorthanded storytelling and gets it across. But they're just using the galaxy disk and cutting it into fourths, right? So anyway, so it was like another
which helps for you to be able to visualize
science. Where
things are.
Yeah, it was a good storytelling shorthand, but also gave a chance to, again, overlap real science onto Star Trek. So that's really, so then it became a thing of, well, if that's that, then the Klingons, and Mike kind of sketched in where the Klingons, Romulans, and Federation was, because we knew where Sol, our star. And so that became the meridian for dividing up, it was the center of the galaxy. You draw a diameter through our star, and then you do a 90 degrees to that. Now there's your crosshair. There's your 4 quadrants. And then here's how Romulans and Klingons and then the Borg are up in the Delta quadrant. And that was not a well-known thing in the beginning, but that's where they were in-house. And so anyway, but that was the beginning. And then Jeff Mandel worked when Enterprise came along. He was doing star charts but they were so early days. And so, they had a Warp 5 engine and they're barely setting out from Earth. So there was a lot of importance about getting the stars close in correct. And there wasn't a lot of latitude to come up with flaky fictional stars. He was trying to find real stars that fit. And we might give them an alien name because, but they would be, here's what's, if it's that close, there's only so many stars that close to us.
They weren't going out far enough to be able to get away with making up names.
All this fudge factor of like our science, our observing, our satellites, our probes are going to have a lot of density close to us. When you're going off on, wacky next generation era, 24th century stuff, it's way out there and you can fudge a lot. And, so the wiggle room is gone when you're talking about Archer's early day pioneering. We're barely baby stepping away from Earth. So anyway, that was part of so Jeff got involved in updating and fleshing out Mike's star charts with real close in stars to use. And so he kind of plotted in his head where we were. And sometimes they'd use a real Earth based star name. And sometimes it would be, but where's Risa and where's Andor? And stuff had happened along the way. But anyway, we got off on this tangent. Sorry. But that's what I inherited because I had worked with Jeff back in the day. And then he did a book at the end of his year on Enterprise, the Star Charts book, that was a huge hit with people. And again, it was not just the charts, but trying to talk about star classes, which are actual, and Star Trek's Class M, et cetera, classes, which are fictional. But now we're getting to the point where we are analyzing planets from way off, and they do need to come up with a system. They probably got one in place, but I wish they'd do Star Trek. I wish they would have Earth and Mars be Class M planets. But anyway, all this to say that it was really popular. And then another few years go by and one of the licensees wants to do the maps, only have them. People loved his book, but it was in a book form and gamers wanted to spread the charts out and people wanted the posters. And there's all kinds of people like piecing it together, scanning them and putting them together online. And and they weren't the best. And so somebody said we should, and not just make big charts, but also do some historical things. So that's what the fun of stellar cartography is. The thing was I'd work with Jeff off and on way back when we were kids in college, and then fast forward to meeting in the 90s and the aughts, and then getting to work on that and have it be one of the first cool Star Trek nonfiction projects in a long time. Like almost like we were kids again, and it's the blueprints and the tech manual and the medical reference and those fun. So long story too late short, I just to know that I inherited that project, but I had been there along the way and, bouncing off and consulting, and then got to update it. So in 2013, it's been 10 years now. 2013 was the first edition, and we had to update the rest of Enterprise and the primetime sliver of the Star Trek 09 movie. And then come to find out there were tons of things from the originals and older shows that weren't on the charts at all yet. So I was actually going back to original series and next gen and plugging in systems and figuring out, either getting the real ones because they're real stars, or fudging things or retconning and canon smoothing if there was an issue, and coming up with backstories for things. And the coolest thing out of all that kind of work to do was the artists, the writers, nobody wanted to even touch the Dominion War, making it make sense. We had the basic landscape, but they would talk about individual battles and things. And they were always talking about the homeworlds were always just one loss away from being overrun. And I'm like, well, why is that when Cardassian, Bajor, and the wormhole are over here and the homeworlds are over here, in scale? So anyway, I did some historical metaphors, and because I'm a history buff, and and made it make sense. And I've since had some people go because even the cool charts that Mike Okuda and Doug Drexler did on DS9, they were just spitballing. They didn't make they tried not to tie anything down. They looked cool and had a lot of arrows and gibberish, but they didn't really mean anything, which is just as well. And if they did, I go, well, that's a telescoping, the distance is not to scale. because there was a one or two where they actually did put details down, and there's no way it can make sense. So I just said, they're all canon. That was just on, telescoping view, or that was on the scale is collapsing, it's logarithmic. It's
yeah.
So all that to say, so thank you for the compliment about the maps. Yeah. I'm just the latest inheritor of them, but it's one of the, and then we did the new edition in 2018 and updated for the first year of Discovery, and we kept putting even more in that we realized from the original and Next Gen, et cetera, that weren't there. So it's like we keep adding to it. Now, if we ever update them, there's all of this. And what's cool now is the graphics guru that works on all the shows but Picard, and I know the Picard graphics person too, and we've kind of like not consulted hardcore, but they've got their scale down, and they're adding stars as they go. And when you see those stars on Strange New Worlds, those charts on Strange New Worlds, it's pretty solid. I mean, they're using our stuff and adding in new as they go and making sure it makes sense. So that's really gratifying. And it's just as a fan who wants sanity and some continuity, it's cool, because the old edition wasn't done that way. That was looking back over 20 and 30 years and trying to make things fit after the fact.
Right.
And make it fit with when you'd get a real star, that was cool until, that doesn't really fit with the story point. So now we have to fudge it, or you'd fudge the fictional star because the real star was fixed or whatever. So anyway, and now we've come full circle to the point where now they're starting with this database of a layout, and now they're adding in new ones as they go, hopefully. And so Timothy Peel is anal in the best way, and he's the one sweating bullets and trying to make things fit. And then sometimes he'll reach out and say, okay, what do you think of this? Or this is what the writers want to do, and they're telling me it has to be this way, but I'm trying to figure out how to make it work. And sometimes it's not even about doing the thing. Like with all of this, some of the stuff that's my fanish heart the most, it's like fixing not so much mistakes, but it's what I call canon smoothing and gap filling. It's like just making things so that sometimes fans get all upset about, that's a mistake, that's an error. It's like, no, how about if we just look at that as that's the exception that proves the rule?
Yes.
And sometimes if it's just so horrible, it's just like, I'm like, that was a display glitch. That should have been a 1, not a 2.
Someone's going to know and will point out the mistake there.
Right.
Now, have you ever gotten in, because now we've got,
so there's half an hour on the star charts, but there
absolutely.
You go.
I'm sure we could spend a lot of time on the star charts. And the other thing that we have is, because we have all of this technology, all of these measurements that we're getting from making,
that's what I call texture, not trivia.
Texture, not trivia.
In other words, don't look at it. If something like that is obvious, don't look at it as a mistake and an error, because you're going to have to live, unless you get a chance like Mike did when they remastered Next Gen. And every once in a while they would get to fix a glitch, right? Especially in graphics or depictions of something. They could fix it for the long term. But otherwise, if something is an error or a mistake, use it. And sometimes it becomes so more texture than, everything isn't just poured out of a mold. There are things that aren't perfect in the universe, and the symmetry of things, and even human or whatever species that's naming something or thinking something, maybe they had a mistake, or maybe what we think now, we find out in 300 years isn't so much maybe a better way or a different way, but maybe we were just wrong. We measured something wrong. So anyway, it's like, when that comes up, don't have a cow, don't lose your shorts. Just, because it's there. We have to live with it, unless we're going to start wrenching all of aired canon apart, which some people like to do.
Oh, we will. and don't challenge us.
I would rather, and some people say, that's crazy, Larry. You can't keep duct taping this thing together as the years go by. And I'm like, well, if we give up, then we sure have lost out. And if we get, the worst time was whenever there's been a gap in Star Trek and the new creators come in not quite knowing what they've got to deal with, or being a little bit of the arrogance of the new, thinking, we're going to do this better than anybody's done it before. Yep. And after a year, they're like, oh my God, they're like, and that it happens with motion picture. It happened with Next Gen. It happened with the 09 movie. It happened with Discovery. to, one degree or another. So it's like, and then people the next 10 or 20 years are running around trying to smooth out, maybe, depending on what it was. And finally we get the Klingon augment virus, and then the next time around we just get northern and southern Romulans. Oh, that was a much simpler, elegant, way to fix that, the whole appearance thing. So, or it's just species diversity. It's just species diversity. But anyway, I see, this is the kind of stuff where I talked to behind the scenes people, and we do, I edited magazine, The Communicator, wrote my book, talked to behind the scenes people about how things were made. But my original jam was just like taking notes, getting it all down, celebrating when everything fits. And then when it doesn't, go, okay, how can we make this fit? How can we smooth this out? Kind of a thing. Or no one ever talks about this and we need it now. So what is the smartest, what do Romulan graphics look like before we had many examples? It's like, fill the gap so anyway, that's my old original, what got me going when I was a kid and had all the time in the world to goof off on Star Trek. That's what I didn't write stories about Spock and Vulcan sexuality. This is what
that was already done, right?
that was the vast majority of fandom was doing that. Yeah.
But you decided to take on something that sounds like it was very, very daunting. And the other thing that we've got is,
well, of course, there were only 79 episodes then. So
yes, that was easy then. I bet. Warp drive, warp scale. We're able to calculate how fast a ship can travel in regards to how many times faster than the speed of light. When you were doing this and all this work with the maps and cartography, and I know that the plot is going to win. If the plot says this needs to happen, then it's going to happen. But have you ever come across an instance where when you take those things, we can calculate this is how fast the ship goes, but for them to depict going from here to here and the amount of time that they are suggesting it takes, no damn way. We're talking about a trip that would be several months at least, and you're acting like it would be a few days.
Well, yes, and way before me. Mm-hmm. I know Jeff has came up with there are a couple things. In fact, he invented. This happened with, Rigel supposedly has all these planets, right, that have been mentioned. For one thing, it was a cool sounding. The original series especially went over. There was Rigel 2, where Hyngus was from, and so it was a Class M and had a humanoides, and Rigel 12 was the mining planet for the Mudswim, and Rigel, there's another one or two. Rigel 5 was the place that were a species like Vulcans because they synthesized a blood plasma for journey to baby. And then Enterprise comes up with Rigel 10, and that's the base where all the stops where it's snowing, right? Yeah. So and then in Doom's Mission, he says that you can't let that thing get to Rigel. Well, maybe the Rigel colonies, So, but what happened was Rigel's kind of far out, and Jeff got into that and was like, "Look, this is way too far for it to make sense on some of these stories." And so he came up with a Beta Rigel on this line of sight from. So it's like there are wackier, thank goodness, even just in our Earth history, there are wacky conventions, naming situations, place names, all people placing names, but all kinds of things where there are wacky things that don't make sense, or they changed, or history altered, or whatever. And so you can always that's why I say the exceptions prove the rules. So every once in a while you just have to do that, and you come up with the thing. So yeah, before I got into it, there were people already who were dealing with, the cutting edge of fandom, who like the astronomy physics people were like, well, this is kind of far out to be, whatever. And then some people like Jeff in the first generation were going, yeah, how about we say this, whatever. And even like in the second pilot, which things were still wild and woolly. You talk about, the Enterprise goes to the edge of the galaxy and goes through the galactic barrier.
Like it can just do that, whatever, on a Tuesday.
Yeah. Like, well, then they'd be like now we know where Earth is. And even if you can't get away from the fact that Earth is about, half to 2/3 of the way between the outer rim. And not that it's a solid, it's a density of stars, but basically from the rim area back to the center of the galaxy, if that's a radius, then Earth is like between half and 2/3 of the way back toward the center. So if you think the edge of the galaxy, and everybody immediately thinks of the rim or if the galaxy was a clock face, or if it was a plate,
right?
And you're in the middle of the plate, well, you're going to the edge of the plate. Well, Jeff was the one that said, and maybe he got this from somebody else, but he's the one that got it on paper. Said, what if when they go to the edge of the galaxy, it's not the edge of the rim, but it's just the thin, you're going to the top of the plate from the middle of the plate. If you could cut a plate in half and you're looking at the thinness,
yep.
Then you're only in the middle of that going to so in all of his charting, he's like, when they went to Delta Vega and it was near the edge of the galaxy, it's not way out toward the rim where you're going 50,000 light years. It's just, it's more like, which is still a ways, but so the thickness is 10,000 versus a diameter of 100,000 ish. So now you're only dealing with maybe 5,000 or less. So a couple of thousand light years versus 10. So that's a funky little way. And that's still a stretch but the main thing was there was the classic warp scale, which was way too little to get anywhere.
Yes.
And so there is one episode. So of the original series, that which survives when they're stuck on the I Am For You, Lee Merriweather planet, and they've been thrown far and they're getting back to it. And there's actually for the first time a formula where they're going at this warp factor. It's this many hours for this much distance. And you're like, oh, look, you got all three variables you can figure. Well, that's far from the classic formula. And so over time, it evolved from thinking, well, there's another variable. And Gene and the writers fudged it. If you go back and look at the original writer's guide, they said it depends on the local, it's this formula plus also including the local density of matter and radioactivity.
Right.
So you got this big fudge factor. So Jeff and whoever he stole it from, maybe, came up with the Cochrane constant, which became the Cochrane factor. So the Cochrane factor is basically your fudge factor of whatever the density of local matter is, that also affects so maybe you speed up, maybe it takes you longer, and voila, you can adjust.
Now you're writing a back door.
Yeah. Now, any story where you're going to the center of the galaxy, though, like Star Trek V or the Magics of Megastu, that's still a hard one those still make you want to cringe. But
that's still pretty far, yes, because...
But that's the ultimate fudging, and that was before my time, so that was already, thankfully, there.
I get the whole, you want to have these stories, whether it's an episode or a movie, and, for example, Star Trek V, the whole plot is... This Spock's crazy half-brother wants to go to the center of the galaxy, and we're going to go there no matter what, and we're going to expect...
Well, that's where Shakari is, or whatever.
Of course, Shakari.
It's not like he wants to go this... It's like that's just where it is, so it happens to be there.
Right. And I'm sure even if they didn't go to the dead center middle of the galaxy, it's still... You're trying to pass off that it would take... They went from Earth to Nimbus 3 on the neutral zone. I'm not sure. I don't have the math in my head as to how long it would actually take at cruising warp or maximum warp to get there. X amount of time, whatever. But to get from there...
Like a few years, probably, but yeah.
Even at warp 9?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
You're catching me with that. I'm just saying it piles up and you're like... It does.
Now that...
Several months at least. But
that blows my mind to think it would take that long. So what they're depicting is...
Let me look.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, you've got the trusty book. It would take so much time to get from Earth to Nimbus 3 and then Nimbus 3 to the center of the galaxy. They make it look like, oh, this all happened within a week. But you're talking years, easily. Many years.
So I'm looking at this is the warp scale that Mike devised for the writers to keep up.
Okay.
And bear in mind that the original series warp scale was different. So let's not say warp 9.99, but let's say, I'll say warp 9.99.
Yeah, the TOS scale, then it was rescaled for the TOS movie era. And then by next gen, they redefined the scale as well. Like warp 13 in the original series scaled to about probably like warp 8 or 9 in next gen.
Okay, I take this back. Take it back. I was so burned by the distances being so long. So I'm going to scale this way back. So if you actually went warp 9.9999, which again, if you sustain that for any length of time, it's something. But we're talking about the Kirk era. Okay.
Yeah.
So that would take across the entire galaxy from one side to the other, warp 9.9999 would take 6 months. So 3 months, 2 months from within, like from Earth area up to the center. Let's say that would take 2 months. But can you go constantly at warp 9.9999 for 2 months? No.
You're talking maybe a few minutes, an hour max, maybe 2 if you got Scotty.
Yeah. So it's logarithmic, right? It's exponential. So let's go back to, so they've got on the chart here 9.99, 9.975, 95, 92. So warp 9. So just going from warp 9.49s down to warp 9, same thing across the galaxy from 6 months to 69 years. That's what I was thinking. So you're talking about exponential spike. So half of that, or a third of that, would be 22 years. So backing from 9.9999 down to just warp 9 is like 22 years versus 2 months.
It's amazing how that warp scale gets exponential like that.
Do we have anybody still with us? Is anybody still awake?
The deep dive old school trekkers are eating this up. And everyone else is just like, you guys lost me. This is too much. But you and I get it. You and I understand it. And we like those things. And that's the same thing that I mentioned before with the whole Lord of the Rings thing is how long does it really take to get from this point to this point? Because, they're going to sell it as this happened within a couple days. But when we actually start looking at the maps, doing the calculations, it gets to be completely incredulous that they would even hint that it would take any less than several months to do this. And so I think that when it comes to the story writing part of it, that's probably where you would run into some of the most challenging parts of it, because I see here there was a lot of consultant work that you did on top of being an author. And with that as a creative consultant, so you must have been in the scenario several times where you've got to follow canon. Canon doesn't follow you, but you're trying to make something at least believable and not let them get stupid with a story. Yeah.
Well, and just to be clear, I've never been. I've done this off and on, especially back like in the Berman era. Since Secret Hideout and Alex, all the current series. So Dr. Aaron McDonald is the astronomer physicist that they've got as a primary science advisor, and Dr. Muhammad Noor. And they're both great people, wonderful people, and huge Trek fans.
Yeah, I talked to Dr. Noor on
kind of
this.
The biological side of things.
Yeah.
So I've never formally consulted. It's been a thing kind of the star charting thing is a mess that Aaron and Mama don't want to, they don't, for Aaron, it was be a thing of, we want to find an actual existing star that's a brown dwarf or a binary that's a this and a that. No. And then they would go, oh, let's find it. And we'll find that. So that's what that might be about. We need it to be in this kind of region if we can find it, or we want something with these properties. What would that look like in real science? Oh, well, you probably, that's the kind of consulting. But this thing about keeping up with where things are, fictional and, whatever, that's a minefield and a nightmare. And it's only because, again, we had this hump of over the years, people contributing and Mike coming up with the blueprint, sketching it out, and then Jeff doing a ton of the original stars he needed close in for. He did the lion's share of the setup, but then that ended in 2001. So the last 3 years of Enterprise, and I say Prime, the Mirror Universe. We go with the assumption that the Mirror unless there's something we know, like in the Kelvin universe, Vulcan was destroyed arbitrarily. In the Prime universe, Romulus had a supernova.
Yes.
And it goes back and forth. What exactly was it? Who do you want to believe? And what's the latest people writing stories? Was it manufactured, or was it a subspace shockwave, or was it just a regular simple supernova that only affected the Romulan and Reman planets, which is where we are now. But for 10 years, we had a whole retcon thing about why it was affecting so many sectors of space, because it wasn't an actual typical supernova. But so there's a little bit about who's running the store right now. But for the most part, things are pretty settled. And people now don't really want to get back into any. They're just happy to have everything make sense, and they're happy to start with this landing. Like the very first episodes of Discovery, when it was back, and they had the big star chart in the ready room. It was Lorca's ready room in the beginning, and with the Klingon War there, and that was right out new graphic style, but the placements were all right out of the charts that Jeff had started to set up, and then I added to the first go round. And then between 2013 and 2018, the 2018 edition adds in all those Klingon War bits and everything in between 2018 and so anyway, we got off on this thing about the star charts, but we're gonna need to get back in and update things even more so than what they're because they're what Tim and the department, and when they're putting up the charts, that's cool. They like the active stars they're keeping open, but they give they'll mention throwaway references to planets and stars all the time, and they don't necessarily go there, or we don't see it, but they're still there, which means they need to be located somewhere and make sense. Here's the thing. So on Picard, Terry Matalas, they had a lot of fun with the fact that during Enterprise there'd been a Imtalis Prime, right?
Yes,
Imtalis Prime. So they went back there and made it this scummy, seedy, the District 6 planet, as a joke about him.
Yeah.
So the thing is, what was the reference? And it's like, we didn't make this up. It came from Enterprise. Okay, but wait a minute. It came from like first or second season Enterprise. Trip is the one who says, he just mentions it and says, oh, the something's a Metalis Prime. What does that mean? That means that planet has to have been the same one we see in Picard later. That planet has to have been somewhere, because Trip had never been off Earth until the Enterprise launched, until the NX-01 launched. Mm-hmm. So we can trace the basic, and Jeff did. He traced the first year or so of Enterprise, and then so like a third of the way into the second season, Imtalis Prime has to exist in that close-in world of the Enterprise, the NX-01. Not zipping around the galaxy or the quadrant even, but just so Metalis Prime has to be fairly close into the homeworlds. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when they zip back and forth to that scummy planet, unless there's another Metalis Prime out there for some reason, then that would be a stretch. That planet's got, so it's like, oh, what's the furthest I could have had Trip get adventurous and get to a planet on a shore leave that we don't know about?
Yeah.
So find the route and then do a lot. So whatever's the closest back toward the world that they're bopping around in, before Pioneer Day.
Yeah, and that's got to be difficult.
So that's a typical thing here of what starts off as a cute in-joke. Now it's actually tied down, guys. So we'll have to figure, otherwise, how did Trip get to this? It's just way on up halfway to the Delta, the Beta Quadrant boundary. Well, then how did Trip get way out there back in the first 2 years of Warp 5 flight?
And how do you get lucky enough to even have someone there to tell you that, oh, well, this was referenced back in this episode of Enterprise. This is where he went and how he said it. So it's like, oh, shit. Okay, so now we have to take this planet that we wanted over here. Now we've got to bring it in over here because there was a canon reference made. So I totally get that.
I'm telling you, Big J, we've lost everybody now.
We have. It's just you and me. It's just you and me talking right now. An audience of two. I do more than this, everybody. I really do more than this. But this was my original. This is why whenever things circle back around to where I can, it's like, oh, I wish I could just, all the interviewing and the commenting and having to like interview people for an audience instead of just interviewing them for facts that I want. We have to make a show out of it. And that's fine. That's cool. We want to be entertaining. But there's times when I just want to go, can I just go back and do the little goofy things that make me, like I said, I never wanted to write stories. Well, I wanted to write stories, but I never was like burning to do it.
every once in a while I was like, we never saw the blah blah, or we've never been to Teller Prime yet. We need to do a story on Teller Prime, but it's not about here's the story now. How am I going to flesh it out? But this is the thing that I can still, when the shows are going by and I go, now I might, like DM Tim Peel and go, was that what I thought it was on the thing? Yeah.
Well, I'm sure you're proud to see your work on the screen and see what you do and contribute to.
Well, yes. Well, I'm glad. Well, again, I feel like it's there were 2 iterations first, and then finally settled into the thing that stuck. And it was when there was active Star Trek happening, and Mike Okuda was responsible for it. Not in a hardcore. And there were, there's the famous one behind Dexter Remmick's head that's blown up, and then it's in Captain Quirk's quarters from a century earlier. That chart that looks really cool, but it's kind of a big pile of nothing.
Yeah.
The Memory Alpha guys loved that chart for ages and took it literally. And I'm like, no, this can't be literal. Like, there's nothing, the scales don't work, and it looks beautiful. But now we do. Now it's no different than the DS9 war maps that you'd see, right?
You know what I like pointing out in that scene from Conspiracy when Remick got his head blown off? It was Riker that went for the face shot. You talk about an evil man. He's the one. Go back and look at it and look at the 2 phaser blasts. Riker went for the face. Like, oh my God, what kind of sadist? He's like, I'm going for the headshot.
He's the one that he's like Rutia in what is the second season show. He's the one that like shoots her through the little girl servant that's really the alien.
Yeah.
He shoots her like 3, 4. He keeps upping the charge and shooting her and up to the gate shoots her. He's the one that's like, we can't shoot that little innocent girl. It's like, innocent girl, hell, that's
the hell I can.
Yeah. He's the one that, 4 shots finally brings her down.
Riker has that mean side. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway. That sure skewed this whole thing off the Star Charts rails for a while.
We love it. We do that. That's just one of the things that's kind of a tradition with us. You should see, there have been many times when I'm with the others doing a podcast where I will literally ask while we're recording, and we don't really edit things out. It's just, we like it to be like how it is, to feel real. And I'll ask, how did we get here? Where are we at? And how did that happen? Because you go on this tangent, and then to explain that, you have to go here. Then you've got to explain that part, and you got to go here. Well, let me back this up. And it's just, before you know it, you don't even know what you're talking about that night. Like, okay, well, what was the subject? Yeah. Were we reviewing an episode or something? And now we're all over the place. But let me ask you this, because this is very interesting. I'd like to know more about it. You are serving as a founding advisory board member for the Nichelle Nichols Foundation.
Yes, just because they asked me to, and that's an honor. And what they're trying to do, the original purpose of the foundation was to basically further everything that she cared about, whether that was, diversity in all its aspects, but especially in, as she did when NASA hired her to diversify the look of the astronaut corps for the shuttle. The shuttle was going to need a ton more astronauts. We were beyond having, which was the 60s and problematic, but not only were the early astronauts and they were awesome and brave and courageous and all that, but they were all out of the jet pilot flyboy.
Yeah.
Which led to some issues at times. And there were also several black pilots that wanted to do that. And there was a color barrier to getting into the test pilot program in the beginning. Now, eventually not, by the 70s, not, but the first few Right Stuff early heroic astronaut days, it was, very white and male.
Yeah.
And one of the things they realized, now we have to times 10 our astronaut corps for the shuttles, the way they envisioned it. So having Nichelle come in to do that. And it wasn't just like, let's have women astronauts and people of color and all that, but it was like, let's get to the people that have no idea in their wildest dreams, they would be able to become an astronaut. Let's go to the inner cities. Let's go to some of these diverse areas and people where they're not, or less privileged, and recruit. And that's what she did. And then tragically, when we had a couple of, especially the Challenger accident, like half the crew were people she had recruited, which was the downside of that.
I didn't know that.
Judith Resnick and Ellison Onizuka and Ron McNair and probably maybe one more.
all this,
so anyway,
all this time.
But the foundation is set up to, that's just one aspect. But whether it's media or business, young people, like you opening up the dream door for them and saying, yes, you can, basically. STEAM and STEM. And now I say STEAM because you add in the arts in there too. But the careers for kids like that, but also, all the aspects of her life. So whatever I can do to help out. So, yeah.
And that sounds like a very, very outgoing, something that helps someone realize a skill or ability that they didn't know that they had. Mm-hmm. Because I don't know about you, but for me, I just wonder what makes someone wake up one day and just decide, I want to be an astronaut. I want to go into space. Or for you to say, I want to write about going into space. And to me, I think that's pretty amazing to have that. We all have those things that we just get up one morning and decide, this is what I want to do.
Well, see, it was hard for me. Well, I was a space kid. I was a NASA kid. Okay. Because I was when I was a little kid was the Apollo moon landings. And it was so disappointing to go to the shuttle. It was like, well, this is going to be boring for a while. But I grew up with, and everybody, the era when everybody would drop everything and everybody would run in to watch the launches on TV, live. And it was a big deal. And part of it was, I realized later, part of it was like, oh, they didn't always go up the way they were supposed to. So we were like especially if they started having crews, and they were manned or crewed, it was the thing. But and since I was like in grade school, somehow, and maybe it's because my folks touched history too. My dad was a World War II veteran. He didn't talk about it a lot, but I don't know what it was, but somewhere on the way I became a kid. I just really loved, especially American history, especially 20th century. But so I have this history. Now we say nerd. I just loved it. But anyway, the space nerd and the history nerd in me, and then also everything from collecting stamps to building model rockets. I was a model railroad. I mean, I had all these stupid fandoms and hobbies. We said then I had these hobbies, and didn't know what I was going to do when I grew up. The closer I got to graduating, it was more and more terrifying. And then I took journalism and took, speech and theater, and that just made things worse. And and I didn't know, but in the middle of all that mix of things, my long story, I'll cut it short. My ninth grade science teacher is the reason I first watched Star Trek. I didn't control our TV, so I missed the 60s run. I would have been a little kid with no hope of controlling the TV, and if I wanted to. No, I do remember Lost in Space. But by the time by the time of the after school rerun era, got shamed into going home to watch it. And immediately after a while, it sneaked up on me. And part of it was like, oh my God, this makes sense. And the world makes sense. In the ship, their world was the ship week to week. You very rarely got out to anything else. You'd see a starbase once. Mm-hmm. But it's like, you'd have run-ins with Klingons and Romulans or Vulcans or what other ships. And it was a whole world, and they treated it like a whole world. And I didn't have word. Now we have the words. Star Trek invented so much stuff that there wasn't a word for it then, but now world building, and continuity and canon and diversity and all. But the idea that it was this world and we didn't see all of it. And after 2 or 3 go rounds, it was like, oh, well, the tech manual and the blueprints were cool. But what do they not have? Well, the tech manual doesn't have anything. Well, why not? I'm going to do it. I'll do it. And you get the concordance. Right. Oh, well, these stars are just floating around and planets. Those need to be tied down and organized, damn it. Yeah. So it was like, that's where my head was. So, and then I found out that most people who were uber, drawn to doing something with Star Trek were writing fiction. I'm like, okay, that's fine. You go do that. I'll read it, maybe. I'll enjoy it. But, and the thing about Star Trek being, futuristic and diverse and hopeful and optimistic. Maybe I wasn't an old enough kid to have gone through, been, Vietnam, and the assassinations happened when I was little and all that. But so much of the early wave of Star Trek was about, it's an optimistic future to get us out of this miserable world that we're living in now. And we survive, and it gives us hope. And maybe I just took all that. I realized later, I guess I took that well, yeah, of course that's part of it. Gene said, if we don't, if we don't learn to get along one way or the other and not poison the planet and blow ourselves up, we won't be having cool adventures 300 years from now out in space, visiting aliens and doing science and charting, and meeting everybody else. Of course, we didn't do all those horrible things. That's, if we did, then the story's moot. So why are we telling these stories?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it was always like, well, yeah. Okay, now let's go do let's go see what the Tellarite Capitol building looks like, or something stupid, wacky like that, or what are I don't know. But I know that's like that was the main thing for so many people, to see hope like that for the future, and not just hope, but optimism and the cool techie science, future projected science. I was like, well, yeah. But then it's like the older I got, I was like, oh, well, not everybody did this. Some of these movies and TV shows you watch, it's just stupid. And as the audience got more and more savvy, science savvy and tech savvy and IT savvy, you could tell who had invested time in making it make sense for the long haul versus who just threw ray guns and spaceships up there on the screen, if that was, what you're talking about. So, yeah. But that was, so anyway, so that was kind of like my path and where I went. And then the time I thought I was going to get to keep doing that, but instead I needed to do and doing encyclopedia time, collecting everything and organizing it so it was a reference and you could go back and find it and do it easily and update BigJ's concordance, only do a few things differently or more precision, more precise, and then get to do that, but then go, oh, no, we have an encyclopedia. Could you do a making of? Well, the making of to me was Stephen Whitfield's classic. And I'm like, oh, well, okay. This is what the companion came from. It was like, well, you've got the book written. Can't you just do it as a companion, not encyclopedia? And I'm like, okay, sure. Yeah, I can do that. But I'm like, oh my God, like he interviewed people. I was supposed to do it in 3 months. Yeah. How am I going to interview? I'm sitting in Oklahoma. And this is cool that I have a contract, but I don't know anybody. And I knew a few people. So I leaned on the people I had written with, like Mike and Rick, and did something in 3 months, the Blue Book. And then, because I was not going to be one of those people that fans would say, oh, you just threw some stuff together and it's a ripoff and you just slap Star Trek on it. And it's right. Crap. I had that bar. I had the Stephen Whitfield making a bar to hit. And even the one that, was done for the compendium that Alan Asherman did. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I got to hit this. I can't be one of those crappy people I criticize, even though it's not my fault. It's the way the system and the contract and the New York to LA, it was like, I'm caught in the gears, but it'll be my name on it. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So if something goes wrong, it's going to be your fault. If something goes right, it's going to be someone else's. I'll get all the mail, not some faceless editor or some faceless person that set the budget up at Pocketbooks, totally out of my control. It won't be them. It'll be mine. I have the name on it. So, you're the guy that they can get a hold of. When an episode of Picard season 3 would come down, yep, and there'd be a glitchy part in that, and Terry is online with fans saying, I know, I'm trying to fix it. We're trying to get it like from Thursday by Monday. They've got it, it's that same feeling, only on a little bit different elevated level. It's like, my name is on this show. I've cultivated this expectation. I gotta, it's beyond my department, my pay grade, even maybe, or my knowledge base. Yeah. But we got to get this fixed, or else I'm the one it'll come down to me. Yes. So anyway. Do you ever regret not getting into something like Star Wars, where you could just do whatever you wanted? You didn't have to tie anything into reality. It's just, to me, it feels like with Star Trek, it's science fiction. Star Wars, science fantasy. With science fantasy, you could do whatever you want. You don't have to you could have star charts if you wanted, but really you could do whatever the hell you want with it. Well, see, you don't have to ground it in anything if you don't want to. I was a kid. Star Wars came out. I saw it 6 times in the Star Wars, 1977. That's what it said on the screen. Star Wars. That was it. Didn't say episode 4. I did, but whatever. The posters you went to see Star Wars. Nobody said, I'm going to see episode 4, A New Hope. Exactly. But we saw a lot of it. It was fine. It was cool. It sure vaulted visual. It sure started a wave, a crash course. It's what got the motion picture made, got Paramount to, get off the pot and get something done finally. But if you had told me then, I've said this many times, if you'd told me then, it was just a movie series. And then they did another 2 hours in a couple years, and it sold a ton of toys. and little kids, and that's cool. And it obviously started a sci-fi boom in Hollywood, and lots of cool stuff, Close Encounters, motion picture, and lots of Drek, right? Everybody was cranking it out. And
they all wanted a piece of what Star Wars did.
Yeah, well, it's like we got to give them the visual, we got to give them the special effects, we got to give them the special movie acting, writing, sets, crap, but we got to give them this whiz bang pow special effect, because that's what people took away. It's kind of like the Barbie hit now, and all these studios, big and small, and rinky-dink producers, quick, we're gonna do toy movies. It's like, no, that's not the
that wasn't the takeaway.
That wasn't the takeaway. That was their takeaway. It was not the right takeaway. But anyway, it was. If you had told me then that, 30, 40, 50 years from now, there would be, and they finally started doing animateds, and now they're doing live action series. But for so long, Star Wars was just, 6 hours, 12 hours, 18 hours of movies. Okay, now a few seasons of half-hour anime, it was creeping along. But there's 800 hours of Star Trek eventually. But if you told me in the late 70s that 30 or 40 years from now, Star Wars was going to be 10 times more popular than Star Trek, I would have said, oh, like, what did they come up with later? Because I'm like, literally, I was like, so Jedi-ness became a real religion?
Yeah.
Or what was, it was fun. And they spent tons of money, and they pioneered a lot of movie tech. But I was like, what was it enough to stick together more than what I knew Star Trek already had in their 80 little hours and we're going to do with a movie? You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
And it's the same thing of now when I used to laugh about MMM games. When massive multiplayer online games came out, and you'd see one or two of the friends. I'm like, and they finally did, and there were the stops and starts to get it going before it landed with Cryptic, and the STO that we have now has been 10 years and counting, and is massive and massively popular and successful.
Let's see,
Star Trek had this universe ready-made for that. It was ready-made for that.
I think it's around 14 years that STO has been going.
I got to quit saying 10 years because that was painted. But my point is, it's a huge, aside from all the philosophical things that attract people. Yeah. The universe itself is huge. It's like ready made for that.
Yep.
Way more than Star Wars, got by on trading cards and books and comics for a long time as far as their unit. Now they are fleshing it out, and they're, but as long as they have these little short seasons, they'll never catch Star Trek. But again, as I say, it's not a contest.
Right. Right.
It's not a race. But I literally...
The ones losing are the ones saying it's not a contest or a race.
No. But it's not like I sat down and consciously said, okay, I'm going to pick Star Trek. That's not what it was, just like what they were. And Star Trek made a bigger thing, even before some of this we've been talking about. It was just, there were more hours of it. It fit together. And the DNA of Star Trek was they cared about the characters and the stories and not going off on weird tangents that didn't fit. And I think maybe even more so than that, Star Trek was us. And every time Kirk would have one of those history lines where he's, we laugh about it's as if a broom was in a perfect vacuum whenever Spock or Scotty or McCoy, they do the modern characters all do the same thing. We were laughing because the other day on Strange New, they did it too. No, on Laura Jackson. It's like, it's as if, it's what they make fun of in Galaxy Quest when it's like, can you find a rudimentary lathe or something? It's like when they do the thing. It's as if a fly and a match, where they talk the MacGyver puzzle out loud to explain the weird science. It's
I've got to rewatch that movie.
Anyway, my point's trying to be that's like I didn't consciously. That's just the nature of the beast. Yeah. They just were grounded and did this. Oh, it's what I started to say was it's when Kirk would say they're dealing with some new wacko on a planet, and he would say, "Oh yeah, Caesar, Hitler, Napoleon, Caesar, Napoleon, Hitler, Lee Kwan." It's the same old story. And not only did it explain to the audience what we're talking about, dictators, maniacal one-off fascist leaders.
Right.
but it would be grounded in Earth history, and it would be like, hi, we're just the latest stop in this through line, but we're Earth. And it's not like every time Star Wars would flash by and you'd see a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and I would stand up and go, who cares? It's not like that. Mm-hmm. But it's just that if you're going to invest your time, like everybody who got into, the timeline as well as like star charting, it's like figuring out the timeline and making stuff fit.
Oh, God, the timeline.
And that's another thing that's been smoothed it was pretty good to begin with, but like smoothing things and random references. People in a show would go, well, we've been this way for 1,000 years. But, okay, so give or take, he's rounding off, but give or take here, or 100 years or 3. And putting that coordinated thing together, a lot of which happened in Enterprise. Anyway, what I'm saying is just those things, the DNA of Star Trek, there were hours that were well grounded. And they made boners at times, but they tried, versus Star Wars was just the oohness of it all.
Yes.
And I get people were swept up in that. And part of it was in the beginning, it was a movie and Star Trek was a series. So they got to, even though they had a little budget for the first one, and then they upped it, right? But even then, it was still a cinematic budget with, effects and sparkle and ooh-ah, spectacle.
Yeah.
And better costumes, better, even though they were on a budget in the beginning, but they're shooting the series on little sound stages, and you'd read about how cheap they were and cutting budgets and all that. And on one hand, it couldn't compare to Star Wars. And why would it? It was apples and oranges.
Yes.
But if you're 10 or 12 or 15 or something in the 70s and 80s, you didn't care. Star Wars was, this is cool. And some people may have, this whole thing about keeping track of who's in what camp and all that. It's like, I didn't care. I just went where I wanted to go and I enjoyed Star Wars. It wasn't competition,
It wasn't. You like them both. You like them both.
Yeah. Now you would root for motion picture.
Yeah.
And you would root for Wrath of Khan. And okay, well, that's more like at the box office and all that. But it was the 80s and there were tons of, Indiana Jones and all the Star Wars and the sci-fi. And there were tons of great movies that way. And then, but you would kind of root for the home team, but enjoy football or baseball.
Yes.
All over,
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not like I consciously, it's just like Star Trek was what I wanted.
You just went there, you gravitated towards that.
And it wasn't, and it's like, I never wished now with all the drama, it was sad to see Star Wars just economically, financially become huger than Trek. And then Trek took 12 years off. Right. And Star Wars got even bigger. And so now it's even further behind. And I want to go, Star Trek is why there is a Star Wars. Like, Lucas got his last funding because Star Trek blew up as the failed dead show that suddenly invented pop culture fandom.
Yep.
The way it did.
Yep. Someone had to come first and we did it. And
and write the book on all this stuff. And what became Comic Cons were media cons in the beginning that split off from Lit Cons, which had always been little authored, sci-fi with some artists and cosplay in them. Yeah. A little bit. Yeah. So anyway, again, it's not about keeping score and all that, but I just I'm kind of glad that now things may be evening, but they're starting to get more in scale as all the things that rode for 20 years here, 15, 20 years, Marvel and DC and Star Wars and even Harry Potter's, they're all kind of taking a breather and maybe having to retool a little bit. And Star Trek is getting its, as I say a lot of times, getting its big boy chair at the table back again.
Yes.
Or its seat at the big boy table back.
It's getting there. It's getting back.
And again, not that it's about keeping score. But I look over at the other fandoms and I go, I can go watch a Star Wars movie and just think what I think about it and not be all invested in the drama of it.
Right.
And exactly. Go, you guys, it's fine. It's basically okay. Or I did like that one more than that one. But it's not the end of the universe. And I don't like to I think that way about Trek either. It's like, at the end of the day, guys, it's on film now. And unless they go back and re-edit this in the future, it is what it is. So for the good, the bad, and in between, this is what we're living with. We're still living with shades of gray, and we're still living with And the Children Shall Lead.
Yeah.
But at least And the Children Shall Lead has the cool UFP red banners.
It does, which were nice. Larry, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. It was a great talk. I love it. even if it ended up being just you and I and a few listeners that held on through the rest of it. But
I hope I didn't totally ruin your plan for
this was great. No, this was absolutely great. And I really enjoyed all of it. And I hopefully will be able to stay in touch. I would love to be able to do this again sometime. I think it was a lot of fun.
Oh, sure.
And so, yeah, we'll definitely do that.
This isn't all I do, though, just so everybody knows that, we have the shows and the streams and the podcasts, and we do the location tours with Trekland Treks. It's like we went old school here and backwards that way, but it's all good. It's all good.
We have fun doing it, and that's all that matters.
Good deal.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, BigJ, and best of luck with the show and everything happening.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I've got another one here in about 12 minutes. And it's funny. It's the guy that he went to high school. We went to the same high school together. His name's Jack Marshall. So he's...
Oh, my goodness.
Do you know Jack?
It's been years since I've seen him.
Okay.
Tell Jack I said hi.
Yeah, I will do that. Yeah, we're from the same town, same neighborhood, went to the same school, different times, but it's like, what are the odds of meeting someone involved in this thing that I like in Star Trek? And we might have even crossed paths some way or another. Now, I was a kid when he was in high school, but he would have known my brother and sister. So it's like, yeah, you never know. The galaxy is small. So is the world. But I will tell them. To what
Uhura, there's an Uhura line I always love when they're looking for Kirk and Spock or whatever, and they're trying to find them, and she says, he asks her something like, why haven't you got on this, or why haven't we found them, or something, and she just says, it's a big galaxy, Mr. Scott. But there's the inverse too.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay.
Sure thing. Trek well.
Yes. Trek well and live long and prosper.
We are Beyond Trek Podcast. Lower your inhibitions and surrender your years. We will add inspirational and hilarious Trek content to your day. Your attention will adapt to subscribe to us. Resistance is futile.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can support us at patreon.com/BeyondTrek.